Go ahead and get started with this panel, with the focus being again, it follows our keynote, the human edge of the Internet of Things, with major emphasis on terms of how do you have this confluence of security, privacy, and yet trust across the network. And our moderator for this is going to be Dr. Jerry Purdy, who is well known to many of you. If you've read his articles, he's written for 20-plus years in a number of magazines and really is an internationally recognized expert in this field. So, Dr. Purdy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to lead this session today. What we're going to do is gain a lot of knowledge, experience, and insight from the group of people that have been assembled here to comment on things. And I love the introductory comments to think about all the possibilities of Internet things. I mean, your mind gets mind-boggling about all the exciting things we're going to be living through over the next 10, 20 years where this is going to be frothing and happening. And I think this session got me to stop and think, okay, that's all wonderful, but how are we going to make sure that it's safe and secure? Or how can we maintain privacy? So we have some, and the trust issue. I think we have a lot of potentially very challenging issues. And it's good that the subject of this privacy and security and trust are being discussed while we're arm-waving and talking about, oh, everything's going to get connected, the cars and the people and the meters and the homes are going to all be connected. But we don't also want to wake up someday and find out, oh my goodness, we've run into a problem we never thought about before. So I would like each of the panelists going, let's say, go start with Adam, going this way. Just give a 1-minute introduction of what you do, what company you work for, what your responsibilities are, and then we're going to get right into the questions and go for it. So, Adam?
Okay, great. So my name is Adam Chishlar. I work for Amdocs. We are an international software provider to the telecommunications industry. We specialize in the back office, billing, and operations support systems, which help all of these communication service providers deliver services to you, the end user, through your mobile phones and through your home cable television and through any kind of data or voice network communications throughout the globe. I'm actually the director of Connected Home Solutions with Amdocs in North America, and we have a connected home product that helps enable the user to connect all of these different devices that you find in your home increasingly, and or working day to day to address some of these security issues and some of these challenges that were talked about briefly before, and we're going to talk about here in a minute.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Sandeep Yadav. I'm a research scientist at the Mala. For those of you who are not aware, the Mala is a botnet detection company. We apply a lot of big data techniques to detect botnets and to attribute those threats to specific campaigns, specific actors. My primary responsibilities are designing and developing such systems, such machine learning systems for detecting new anomalies in the network, primarily through DNS traffic and attributing them again to specific actors. And I'm really excited to be here.
My name is Annie Anton. I'm a professor and chair of the School of Interactive Computing here at Georgia Tech. I'm really excited to be here. I've been working in the area of software engineering, specifically requirements engineering, and privacy and security for different kinds of information systems for about 15 years now. And specifically, I focus on how do we get systems to comply with federal privacy and security regulations. So I'm very eager to see what comes of our discussion today.
My name is Dave Foote. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Hitachi Communication Technologies. That's a division of Hitachi that does telecom infrastructure and support systems for large service providers. As part of Hitachi, Hitachi Power does machine-to-machine for the smart utility industries. Hitachi Medical provides some of those remote sensing and remote medical devices. So Hitachi as a corporation touches on almost every aspect of the Internet of Things and machine-to-machine. And the last comment I'll make is I'm a Tech alumni, so it's good to be here. And my son's here, so I'm spending lots of money with Georgia Tech right now. And going back to the internet, my first job out of Georgia Tech, I worked in the Air Force, United States Air Force. I worked on this little experimental network called the ARPANET. So I can say more truthfully than at least one politician that I helped invent the internet.
Hi, I'm Willard Dawson. I'm a security architect at New York Life Insurance Company, actually based here in Atlanta. And I have history also with Georgia Tech. Hi, Ron. Back in 2003 through 2004, I was information security manager here, and I've held a few positions since then, and some before that too. And also went to school at Tech. So happy to be here.
Well, that was good. Thanks for all those introductions. We already had met Jeff. Jeff, you had some context comments you wanted to make before we sort of got into the rest of the questions?
I hope it's kind of to summarize some of the things that we already talked about and some questions were asked, and that's how you can make a system that actually supports people, improves their lives, and yet it's secure, but you get the information you need. And we're already seeing things like that. So some of you may have seen yesterday in the paper, you know, the black boxes they want to put into cars so it actually meters how much you're driving. Of course, there's all kinds of privacy concerns because the government has not exactly been stellar in terms of how they may use this information recently. And even in the Netherlands, places where Europe is far ahead of the U.S. in some of these fields, but the smart meter program there was rejected in many cases because of concerns about privacy, just in terms of having smart devices that communicate in ways that you don't necessarily know what it's doing. So some of this is, in a sense, making sure that people are aware of the issues. And there are incredibly research-oriented platforms behind this. So I did want to make one quick comment up front that Georgia Tech recognizes that. So falling under IPAT and directed by GTRI, we're actually creating a center in the Internet of Things that's called the Center for the Development and Application of the Internet of Things Technologies. A very long name, just remember it as SEDATE. So SEDATE is being stood up. And Mr. Alan Luche, who you will see around here, is the managing director of that. And we hope that some of the things we're going to talk about here are going to form a basis for where we're going to go forward with SEDATE.
As one of the things some of you may not know who I'm affiliated with, I'm a mobile and wireless market researcher with a company called Compass Intelligence, a sort of virtual company around the United States. And I publish this industry newsletter called Inside Mobile. If anybody wants it, just give me your card and write on it, and I'll be glad to add you to the list. But I think in getting into these four or five questions that we have over the next 45 minutes, think in terms of, you can sort of assume that there are benefits to a lot of connectivity. Isn't it wonderful we could connect all our cars? Couldn't we maybe prevent a lot of accidents? Shouldn't we all be censored so we're healthier? Or shouldn't the homes have connectivity so we can control lights and temperature and have everything connected? I mean, it's sort of like all exciting. And I think it's also someone like me just initially thinks about, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if? That's sort of the business plan objective. Wouldn't it be wonderful if? And then you think, oh my God, what if somebody were to get a hold of all the lights in all the buildings and turn them on at once? That might not be good. Or turn them all off. It's our TV show about that revolution. Let's talk a minute and try to mix this balance between connectivity issues and how we approach these security and privacy associated with these issues. So I don't have there's nobody here to be making a slide presentation, so we'll sort of get people's thoughts on these. But my first area was what happens when most homes, cars, and mobile devices are all interconnected? Are we going to have it be all positive? Do we have concerns that somebody will take over the roadways or the homes? And how do we approach the security and privacy issues as we build these things? And I don't know if we, how are we going to do this here? Do you want to make, you raise your
Sure,
hand,
I
we'll go
mean-
first. I'll try to make sure everybody gets a thought in, though.
So my first thought to such an ecosystem where everything is connected is obviously it's great. People will be able to utilize each and every part of their lives to get information which can help them in the future, but it's also going to lead to a deluge of data which will be difficult to handle and the threats associated with it. I personally deal with I see a lot of partner related activity, and you can definitely envision attackers utilizing all the devices that we have and use them perhaps for distributed denial of service attacks. Your refrigerators might become a bot, or a coffee maker might become a bot which is attacking any particular target. I don't know. So it's definitely going to be, on the negative side, there's definitely going to be problems that we would see. On the positive side, yes, there'll be obviously the things we are touting, the Internet of Things, because it's going to help improve the lives.
All right. Well, I'd like to get some additional comments. David, you
Sure. Yeah. So, fortunately or unfortunately, right now, a lot of the solutions in the Internet of Things or machine-to-machine are siloed systems. Bill kind of hinted at this a little bit in some of his forecasts, especially like in areas of industrial. Large corporations are doing lots of machine-to-machine Internet of Things already internally for the corporations to improve their OpEx, et cetera. So there's a lot of hidden benefits that the average consumer has no idea of already. If those industries start to promote some of those benefits, and in some sense the idea of insurance companies monitoring your behavior so they can reduce the insurance rates is kind of a corporate driver for a benefit that the consumer might see. But as we start to see some of these benefits coming out of these siloed industries, hopefully that will build a sense of momentum in the mind of the average consumer that there are benefits to these things. Now, for that to happen and really make an impact on the consumer, there has to be full disclosure, especially as some of these siloed solutions impact the consumer. Full disclosure on what the data is being collected, how it's being used, clear opt-in for consumers where they're directly impacted. Because eventually there will be some blow-up. It's going to happen. And so all the industries that are doing machine-to-machine or Internet of Things need to be kind of above board as soon as possible, especially as it directly relates to consumers, to kind of build that goodwill initially and to build the business. What's the value? Why is this helpful? What benefit does it bring to the average consumer? And then as that trust relationship builds up, when the blow-up happens, hopefully there's enough trust to prevent chaos and overreaction in the negative sense.
Okay. Annie, you want to make comments on this?
Sure. So I was thinking of a few different scenarios. I was thinking about, yes, there will be a lot of benefits when cars are communicating with one another, and maybe we'll have more safety, traffic, et cetera. But there can also be some vulnerabilities, because once you can put some malicious software in a car, then maybe someone can unlock the car. Someone could gain access to the car, maybe even get to a point where they can control the car, putting the driver or the users in physical danger. And so that's like an extreme scenario, but it's something that we have to consider as we're designing these kinds of sensors that communicate with one another. Another thing I was thinking about is how the FTC brought an action against TrendNet for vulnerabilities in their small video cameras that were then showing home videos of people in their homes without them knowing so via the internet. And so clearly that's a violation of privacy. And as we start having more sensors in the home, then we need to start thinking about smaller microphones, smaller video cameras, what kinds of things we are recording. If you have a passenger in the car and you have a microphone in the car, are you recording that without the person next to you knowing so? And that could be a violation of wiretap laws, for instance. And so these are the kinds of scenarios that I worry about when I'm doing my work in requirements engineering, and how do you think about privacy by design.
We're going to even talk about some different areas of privacy in a minute. Willard, you work in security. Can you give us a comment about approach to take or how
there's
we should not be concerned, or what are the issues?
I have a lot of thoughts. In fact, I had a colleague who was directly impacted by the TrendNet video problem. He was contacted by the sheriff's office. Apparently his child's bedroom had a live feed on the internet that I guess pedophiles were interested in. And so there's a lot of potential negative impact from that. Speaking of hacking cars, there was a pretty good presentation about that, showing a demonstration of that at Black Hat this year. So it's not an extreme, Black Hat, car hacking was not an extreme case. I think it's already the case that smart cars can be hacked and taken over and remotely steered by someone who may not have your best intentions at heart. It was pretty clumsy, but I think we'll see that capability expand and grow soon. From my current perspective, our primary concern is protecting our customers' health data, personally identifiable information. So while we might be interested in consuming information about that to allow us to do a better job of writing life insurance policies, at the same time, we take extreme care around the information that we have, so that we certainly, the last thing in the world we want to have happen is be a part of a data breach. So data ownership and who has stewardship of that data, I think, is the important thing from a corporate perspective. And relating to legal liability, I think, is what we would really like to limit our legal liability as much as possible. So the controls that we have put in place for risk management are all based on trying to minimize legal liability and reduce the risk overall. Directly impacted from Internet of Things, I think, from our industry perspective, it's not something we'll see directly in the immediate time frame, but something we're keeping an eye on, obviously.
Adam, you've got, I've known your company for many years. I mean, every wireless operator in the world either uses you or, we wouldn't say there are any real competitors, but a competitor to you. All was around originally just doing, like cellular calls. But now you're having to manage the back office, if you will, the transaction loads of things that are going to go very beyond just the cell phone call.
Yeah, no, exponential data flow for sure. And for the service provider, they want to monetize this. I mean, that's what they're in the business of doing. They want to understand how the data flows and charge you, and understand if you've got an unlimited service pack or if you need to be charged for a certain amount of data. So the security around this information is very important. And there is an expectation as a consumer that your data is going to be protected. It's the custodial nature of being the provider. That's an expectation the consumer has. And so if you violate that trust, you're going to create major problems. So when we work with our customers, they have this front and center. They have to look at how to protect your data. And they have to balance that against that personalization that was mentioned earlier, that they want it to be specified to you, they want it to be tailored to you, but without crossing a line that makes you feel uncomfortable. And there's lots of examples out there that aren't just even recent with a video streaming camera. I can look back to years where we looked at billing data for a utility and for a home, and a customer calls up and they're upset because their bill is really high, and why was my bill so high? And we could look at the data and tell that they probably threw a party on Christmas and had a lot of family in the house, and then they threw a New Year's party. And when we conveyed this information, it was conceived as a gross violation of their personal privacy, and they thought people were spying on their house. And it simply was derived from the data analytics of how the consumption occurred for those periods. And because we know a little bit about people's behavior on the holidays, we could infer that. So this is an example where you're trying to help, but then you find yourselves in kind of a gray area and potentially have crossed the line. And so being a good custodian of your data and helping the consumer with that information, and at the same time, understanding the expectation is they trust you to provide a service that works. That's how you build trust initially. You provide something they want. And then they trust you to be a good custodian and to protect their interests and to protect their information moving forward. And it's when you deviate outside those lines that you can get into trouble.
Jeff, any comments on this topic?
Just to kind of echo some of the discussions, but I want to use a use case that Mr. Morelli used, and that was related to the healthcare component. So something I've used many times, you already have a personal area network where part of your network is your Fitbit and your other devices that just do personal health records. But maybe you're being treated for some other type of issue, maybe diabetic, et cetera. So that information needs to go to your electronic health records and be uploaded to your primary care doctor so that they have the real-time information. But perhaps you don't share between PHR and EHR. There may be ways to incentivize people to do it, but how are we going to take, really when these devices, the ultimate capability is these will not be stovepiped. They want to be integrated. So how are you going to integrate the personal health records so that a single person has full-time awareness? And there are ways to do that. We're approaching some technologies for how do you do identity privilege management, and how do you then segment the data from that. But if the point is, if we don't have the trust of the individual using it, they're not going to use it. And that's what we don't want to have happen.
Yeah, I know I was on a TV segment about a year ago when there was this concern about that the operators were, wireless operators were monitoring people. Compared to the NSA, it's probably nothing. But the issue of knowing when your cell phone drops a call. And if you ask anybody, do you want that to be less? Yes. Well, you have to determine where the drop calls are occurring so you can go out and fix it. So there's this concept between I want, but I want to also control, and I want to not be lose that privacy issue, which is the topic I'd like to get into now on privacy as it's associated not so much with the things, but the communication among the things. So the tee-up is how do we maintain privacy in a connected world? As a result of the Facebooks and Twitters, we seem to be becoming more publicly communicating about what's happening, whether it's something personal or something observed in the world. And if that's happening, how do you maintain privacy, what I call privacy in a socially connected world? Yeah, I want to share these things, but I also don't want somebody to put a profile together that takes and misuses the information. So now we have, let's say, the socially connected privacy issue. Who can start off and make a comment? Annie, you want to start on that one?
So I'll make a note that when someone posts something on Twitter or Facebook, generally they know that at least some people are going to see it, right? In contrast with devices or sensors that you may be using, to gain the benefit of that, you have to interact with it, and you can't turn off some things, some features, such as monitoring or tracking collection of information. Mm-hmm. And so we keep talking about these things have to be opt-in, but the fact of the matter is you opt in just by using it, and most people don't understand what that means. So there's a lot of, the two are a little different. But when you start putting all of this information together and creating profiles about people, and people can then start inferring things about you perhaps incorrectly, that's a real concern.
How about another comment?
Yeah, I think one, as we talk about privacy, there's this correlation between the data itself and you as a unique individual. And so that linkage has to be made to help create the risk of privacy. So up until probably a couple of months ago with the NSA, the average consumer had never heard of something called metadata. But now it's this buzzword that everybody understands. So there are techniques to kind of try to break that linkage between all the raw data and the unique person. But even though we have the technology to do that, there's still this matter issue of trust. Does the end consumer, whether they've done an opt-in or whether they understand that they put it on Facebook, the whole world's going to see it, is you as the user of that data, even if you have the techniques like metadata and other mechanisms to kind of protect and break that linkage, you still have to build a level of trust in that user. That, yeah, I understand you can use that technology, but are you really using it sufficiently well to protect me? So there's not just technology components to this as well. There's a behavioral component to it. There's a a PR component to it, and all of those have to be done in a positive way to kind of build that environment where consumers will, the risk-reward benefit of the benefits of these technologies will counterbalance the risks.
Are we going in a world where, going forward, having privacy is I don't know, is it going to disappear, or how do you create, or how do you have any element of privacy? I think we've had so much effort going around to become socially connected. How does that not be so all-encompassing? What does it mean to have anything private anymore? I mean, is that locked up at night? Well, give me your comments.
I aggressively use Tor, so I'm probably not a good representative of the usual person. I value my anonymity. And I think trust is something that has to extend between individuals, but also between organizations. And it's difficult when we talk about the Internet of Things, because we're talking about billions upon billions of devices. We may or may not be able to trust each of those devices to be working. Or I think the basis of trust is an understanding of who you're talking to and what authorizations you've given them. And with anonymity, you don't really have a trust model. You can't trust someone if you don't know who they are. But I would argue the same is true about devices. If I can't really trust the device to be fully authenticated and authorized to do what it's supposed to be doing, how do I know as an individual that a rogue device hasn't been inserted into the equation, and that data is not being surreptitiously collected by actors that I don't approve of? So I think there's a lot of scenarios that we can begin to paint when we think of more than just authorized devices. But the question about how do I authorize, or how does authorization extend to these billions of devices is a challenging one, because now authenticating and authorizing devices at that scale is something that I don't think we're prepared to deal with. And so I have a difficult time putting trust into things that I don't know who they are, what they are, who are operating them. And I challenge even the authorized operators to guarantee that even their own devices are the devices they think they own and operate. Because I think authorizing and controlling your own devices is going to be a challenge.
In terms of designing privacy and security, and we know how hard it is to get one device to be really secure. When you start engineering systems that have multiple devices and multiple kinds of devices, taking a single system, you might be able to guarantee it's secure, but as soon as you start developing composed systems of multiple devices, it becomes really difficult to integrate that. And it's a real challenge for security engineers.
Does this have what we've so far been talking mostly here about things, devices, and say the nature of privacy? I have an issue of, I just almost can assume that we talk about wearable computers, but wearing something may be something that you sort of think of, you have the option of sort of taking it off. And an extension of that is, I think a lot of sensors may be embedded, or we opt in, or our parents opt in. And how do you maintain privacy when you have your health or your medical data all being monitored? I mean, I think I could see some good things about it, but at the same time, I can see a lot of concern over what are we keeping databases of about people. When you want it, it maybe will help epidemiologists look at where agents are causing problems, but at the same time, on a personal basis, I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely an issue in that you're making a trade-off to ideally get some kind of service or some kind of benefit for, strapping on a wearable that tracks your heart rate, or, using a diabetes glucose meter. And you use that in a particular context and you put it down and you don't expect it to be listening to you as you walk away from it. But when you start to talk about these ecosystems of devices, I mean, in some cases, I probably should have people sign a waiver if they walk into my house because I've got stuff laid out all over the rooms. And you never think about that. I don't think about entering this room and thinking, what is recording me? And do they have the permission to do that? And is there a privacy concern? And is just entering the room, am I opting in? And so these are the kinds of questions that I think are going to become much more prevalent, and we have to find a way to manage that. And again, it starts with trust and context. But at the same time, as these sensors are always on and they're alive and they can do more, we have to take that into account and figure out both a legal framework as well as a social framework for this is part of the new connected life. Because it won't just be your car or your home or the watch when you wear it. It's going to be always. It's going to be you drove past a store and you stopped and you were within 15 feet of some kind of sensor mesh that saw who you are and talked to your phone and flashed up a coupon for you to go in and buy a pizza. I mean, that's the way the world's moving to. And is that violating something? Or do you have a framework where you can anonymize yourself, isolate yourself, opt in when you want, opt out when you don't, and things like that? It's a challenge.
Yeah. Sandeep, I'd like your view on this particular issue.
Sure, I just feel that a lot of this would be dictated primarily by policies of the government. So the government has to decide if it wants to give complete control to the user, whether they want to give out the data or not. I mean, the user itself, himself, herself, loses benefits, but that's their choice. And I feel going forward, people will realize the trade-off between what they can disclose and what they can get out of it.
So we have a lot of evidence that shows that people do not understand that trade-off. And we also have a lot of evidence that our government, that regulation lags technology. And that's why you hear a lot of people stressing privacy by design. This isn't something that we can relegate and wait for government to catch up. We really need to design these systems from the very beginning so that we have privacy in place.
That leads to why I guess I wrote the next issue about the trust building issue when we have so much ability in digital to violate trust almost without people knowing it, such as the catfishing issue of being able to pretend you're somebody else, or I'm out just fishing for information to get that. I'd like to start this one with Jeff. How can we approach this issue of, is there a possibility to really have digital trust without having to meet someone, or is the trust really going to always rely back on the person to having a non-digital in-person interaction?
Unfortunately, I think it's always going to come back to the individual. As these devices become more cognitive, you hope you do have the opportunities to opt out. But I think what we're basically saying here is that Internet of Things is going to redefine privacy. And so then the question is, do we want the individual to be able to have access to control that, or is that going to be therefore a market dynamics, or is that going to be a government led function? But my ideal goal would be that the individual will have the ability to define who they want to authenticate with and who they want to share information with, and basically create identity privileges that actually go in two directions. So the identity privilege for you getting access to information, but also vice versa, that somebody else can't get access to your information. And we're working on pieces of that, but as Annie said, the technology is far outrunning right now some of the regulations.
Any other comments? I'd like to have some more comments about how can you build trust in a digital world? Maybe I'm trying to ask for what's the method for solution rather than what the problem is. Willard, let me start with Willard down there.
Well,
You've got to deal with that all the time.
Well, dealing with trust is interesting because well, first off, you don't inherit trust. You have to earn it. And trust is built by establishing an expectation, a set of expectations with your user base, your community of interest, so that over a period of time, that living up to your promises is not, you've not broken your promises, basically. So if you make commitments, you hold true to them. How do you do that with digital data? I think it's a matter of representing how they'll be used and representing that accurately and not deviating from that. So I think there has to be a roadmap for developing trust if you want to do that proactively and not enter into those sorts of things through accidental trial and error.
Some of it, so to Ann's comment about design in from the beginning, is very important. We have technology today to solve a lot of these purely from a technology point of view. You think about the content industry, Hollywood, they're quite strict on their contents. And they have pretty demanding requirements that goes all the way to the point of the chip that's in your set-top box has all sorts of encryption and authentication implementations built in at the chip level to make sure that you can't copy their movies. So we technically we know how to do this. We can work at designing it in from day one. And to my comment earlier, that becomes somewhat doable when all these systems are siloed, right? And when they're controlled by a large corporation that has security officers. And I'm not saying it's not 100% foolproof. None of these things are 100% foolproof. But you make the bar of breakage higher and higher so that whoever wants to break it has to match that bar, takes more and more investment. So as we're thinking about these siloed systems, designing in from the beginning, using these technologies, you can do a pretty decent job of protecting and then therefore building trust. But the vision that was laid out at the beginning by Bill of the Internet of Things is that now I'm sharing data across all these siloed systems, right? So now the problem becomes exponential. And how do you do that? How do you create brokerage environments where I can share data across disparate siloed systems? You can use some of those same technologies, but everybody's got to buy in, right? So my feeling is the raw technology to do what we want to have done exists. It's the policy, which always lags behind. It's building the consumer trust, and that is goodwill and successful, repeatable, positive results. That's going to take time.
Ken, in extension of that, Lanny, I'd like you to comment on this. Can we, from say academically or from a science standpoint, prevent these digital attacks that are occurring, whether they're from friends or foe? Is it naivety and poor implementation of what we have today? Why is it still happening? Why don't we learn from that and able to control it? Or are the attacks always going to be able to get beyond our firewalls?
I think that attacks will always be able to get behind our firewalls. We will never completely stop that problem. There are things that we can do to minimize it, though. So how many of you have failed to update your software for the latest security patch, for instance, right? So there are things that we have to educate people on so that they can do a better job of it. We also need to make security more usable. It's really, really difficult for people to understand how to use security and how to control their information more. It's really interesting. In Europe, you own your own information. Companies do not own it. The government does not own it. And there's laws to protect that. And here we don't have that. And that basic premise makes a very big difference in the way that we pass laws concerning privacy and security in this country, because it's always very piecemeal and always reactionary. So you mentioned cable TV. We have the Cable TV Privacy Act, right? But it's always after the fact.
So the Federal Trade Commission just opened a proceeding on this whole idea of the Internet of Things and starting to realize the massive policy and security and privacy implications. But by the time they're just starting to ask the question, it's going to take a while for the government regulatory bodies to even figure out what kind of policy to put in place.
There's been a proposal online for an Internet of Things Bill of Rights for consumers. I don't know if anyone's read about that, but I thought I'd mention just a few of the tenets of that, of core principles. One is that open is better than closed. Another one is that consumers, not companies, own the data collected by Internet of Things devices, and that would require a huge shift in the way this country operates and regulates. The of Things devices that collect public data must share that data. And users have the right to keep their data private. So, but we have to develop a technology and educate our users to be able to do that.
Jeff, you want to make a comment?
Just to echo a couple of comments. So yes, the FTC, in fact, I think they're finally opening this discussion. It's next week. Is one of the, they're having a session in D.C. to explore this. There's already a consortium, and it's based off of a framework program, a research program in Europe called You Trust IT, or You Trust It. And so we're actually coordinating with them to look at some of the things that are, okay, what are the lessons learned, recognizing that Europe does approach things a little bit differently than we do. But how can you, one, train and educate people to understand possible issues with security, and then how to then protect the privacy of their data where they need and want to. It's a field that in the U.S. especially is very nascent.
We are going to be asking you all to share or ask some questions to the panelists here. In just 1 minute, we want to make sure that we're staying on time. I did want to get one additional comment made, or some comments made about sort of asking these people about 5-10 years from now, are you optimistic that we'll have a more positive benefit out of connectivity from things, devices being connected, or it'll probably still be a tug of war with concern? So, Adam, maybe you have.
I absolutely think there'll be a positive benefit, and I think it's because with the emergence of connectivity, there are so many use cases. There's so many use cases we haven't even thought of yet, and enabling consumers to experience the ability to do some wildly cool things, like step on a scale that turns the light on and starts the engine of your car. As absurd as that sounds, there is a level of interaction there that's going to drive new use cases, new scenarios that we never thought of yet. Yes, there's going to be some challenges. We're going to move forward and face a lot of these issues with security and privacy, but I absolutely think it's going to emerge, and it's because the technology is no longer an issue; it's an enabler. I mean, many years ago, when I was here at Georgia Tech, we worked on the Aware Home initiative, and I think Brian's here in the audience, and we didn't have wireless. I mean, we didn't have the ability to take things and put it around the house. We had to run cable everywhere. Those aren't the problems we have anymore. It's not if you can, it's should you. And so I think we're going to get people to come to these environments. We're going to get people to come and use these products. And then what we do from there, we'll decide if they stay or if they move on to something else.
Just having that awareness and a positive element, I have thought that at least one clear benefit out of a connected car environment would be to stop these fog-based pileups that occur so much on the road. Because the car coming in behind it can't see, but a wireless transmission that says, "Whoops, we got a problem," slow down and pull everybody off, would just prevent those things from happening. So I think there's really, really positive things we have to really shoot hard to try to get, and make sure that the bad things don't overtake us to make it worse than that. Let me go down and ask Sandeep, what do you think? 5-10 years from now, more positive, negative, or how? Why?
I'm going to toe the line in the middle and just say, definitely, I expect Internet of Things to see a widespread adoption, and it'll become Internet of Everything. But there will be security issues, like Adam mentioned. You will be able to start the car standing outside your car, but there will be issues like somebody will be able to hack into your car's software and maybe cause accidents. The pileups may be prevented in some cases, may not be, like hackers might get into. So one of the major impacts of Internet of Things is how it affects the physical aspects of your life. That part of the security has to be taken care of really well. Sure, you can drive a car which is connected very well to the internet, and it's really cool, but what happens if there's even a single small bug or vulnerability that's present? So I expect it to be positive, but we have to be really careful and really redesign the security mechanism.
Annie, go ahead.
So when I was a student here at Georgia Tech, 9 times out of 10, when you asked a professor a question, they always said, it depends.
Well,
So I'll use that now, and I'll say it depends. And I think it depends on a lot of things. I think it depends on how good we are at designing systems so that users can control their information and secure their information and authenticate. And you know, can we freeze systems so that there's not patches all the time, that we know that that system is completely secure at a given moment. But I also see a lot of benefits from the Internet of Things. And you know, as popular or unpopular, depending on your view, as the NSA recent news is, one could argue that we haven't had any terrorist attacks. And I credit the NSA with that. So, you know, but there's the tension, like, is privacy being violated or not, right? So
yep.
there's always benefits and burdens to every technology.
David?
Okay, so I'm going to be unequivocal, and then I'm going to equivocate. The answer is yes. 5 to 10 years, there definitely will be positive, but let me equivocate why I say it that way. We already have the benefits of the Internet of Things and machine-to-machine, we just don't realize it. Today, the cost of food, when you go to the grocery store, is cheaper because of the Internet of Things. John Deere tractors, we supply technology to John Deere so that when that guy's driving, or lady, is driving the John Deere tractor, it, based on wind conditions, weather, pasture, fertilizer spread, optimized to the inch, how much fertilizer is spread on that ground, right? And so the crop yields are better because of that. We all benefit now, and we don't know it. So the way I'm equivocating is, will the consumer understand that it's the Internet of Things and what the benefit is? I don't know. But they're already benefiting in these siloed ways, right? So 5 to 10 years from now, if we do well with privacy and trust and security, it will probably become more publicly known that, yeah, this is the Internet of Things, it's really cool. If there's lots of crashes and burns, we'll still have the benefits, but they'll be in all these little isolated siloed solutions.
Give me your view. Well,
Data is king. Data has an economic value, and the value of all the endpoint data that's being collected is useful in a huge number of contexts, and I think that's going to the economics of that will drive policy going forward. I think that's the answer there. There is no such thing as security. It's a myth. I'm totally abusing Helen Keller, but it doesn't occur in nature. So to think of something as being fully secure is just a wrong mental approach to take. It's not a binary value either. It's a whole spectrum of possible conditions. So the thing is, there are plenty of people who like to find vulnerable things and break them and abuse things in ways that they were never intended to be used. And I think the challenges over the short term and the long term as well will be to continue to work to ensure that the devices are working as they were intended. And there are some specific point cases that you can think of recently, discoveries, for example, of temperature probes in oil pipelines that were potentially could have been abused. So I think the potential for misuse is huge. So I think eventually it will sort itself out, and I think we'll see mostly positive things, but there will be some steps along the road that we put our foots in the wrong places.
do we have a question from somebody who would like to ask one of the panel? Can you come to one of the microphones here, please? Let's see.
Hi there, Karun Rajshekhar here. Great question. I'd like to start with the last point about data being king. What if the value of the data is far more valuable to the corporation? So Google or Amazon starts giving you free devices in exchange for the data. And we all know that there are going to be millions of people who will sign up for that and take it. I mean, we all use free Gmail. And so that's how does I guess, relating to your question is about the basic rights or the tenants, how does those kind of business model fall into that scenario?
So rights management, company, individual, who wants to make a comment? And Annie, you had made a comment earlier about Europe. Does it mean that the geographies and governments override basic concerns, or what?
I think there's a basic tension between informed users and companies. and governments for that matter too. But if you look at what happened with Do Not Track, this has been a really, really long, big group of like 100 different companies with representatives trying to come up with a standard for Do Not Track. And they're stalled. And they're stalled because of these basic tensions that exist between what companies want, what privacy advocates want, what government wants. It's a tough problem.
We have a question here.
Hi, yes. As we're pushing more onus down to the individual, are we concerned that we're creating deeper levels of digital divide within our society?
Digital divide issues relative to growing technology. Who would like to take that on?
I would make one quick comment
Well,
and
here.
say
Yeah,
that,
go ahead.
of course, we're going to have more digital divides, and I think right now it's, in fact, getting a bit worse. And what we need to avoid is making sure that we don't design to the lowest common denominator in terms of what people may have. That's a concern of mine. It may not quite fit what we're trying to say here, but you can't design to the lowest common denominator, or else the security and privacy, in many cases, will not be effective.
Okay, let's have your question, please.
Yeah, my question is more on the design, following Stephen and your previous comments, and it's actually all of you were validating the point. Our worst nightmare and thoughts of what can be done manipulating data are out there, and they're only getting worse. We know that. Big Brother or whomever is going to protect the data. I'm going more on the thought that I think also on the consumer side, like you were saying, Stephen, earlier, where it's really going to be a lot about the design of protecting things a lot closer to
And
the
what's the
consumer,
question, please?
to the home. So can you comment on that? Can you comment about what are some of the technology applications that can be done on the redistribution of the data repository, if you wanted to call it something, whether it comes from the prescriptive metadata, semantic data, going on authentications across boilerplates. Can you talk about that from that technical enablement of redistribution of data so that it can be protected? So that in order to come to me, they have to shake certain hands for certain data only and leave the rest alone. Does that make sense?
Well, are you asking then who owns the data or who has access? Can you want to make sure, like in a home environment, that you have access to your own data?
No, my question was more from the technology enablement of enabling that data to be accessed only as needed when I am the consumer that owns it.
Yeah, and I think this is something where, when you think about how data is collected, it's the profiling of you and your behavior, not just in your home, but in different environments, in your car, particularly even at your doctor's office inadvertently. The ability of who accesses what when is a challenge, because the average consumer, as we brought up, doesn't understand. In many cases, it doesn't have the education and understanding to say, hey, I want only these people to access this data, but I don't want these other people to see this data. It's difficult, right? So typically what happens is it falls across boundaries, such as this is personal health information. It only should be accessible to my primary care physician and potentially these other groups that process my insurance, but not other people. And in fact, you know what? I saw that doctor in the hallway and I have a personal relationship with him. I don't want him seeing my data. And you have to have a mechanism to now block that person out. So the technical mechanisms to implement things such as HIPAA regulation, you've got to have that in place. But what you're going to end up with is segments of profiles, right? And a way to share what you want to share and not share the other things that you think should be secure. There isn't a good answer for it because it's a really complex problem to think about. I want my friend to be able to see a video stream of my dog running around the house crazy, but only for a 3-minute window when I gave him access, and things like that. The technology is there to do all that. My concern is outside of things like medical data. Who's going to want to do that, right? Is there a value proposition there that makes sense? I think at minimum, we're going to have some basic policies that between you and the provider, the individual and the provider of a service, there's going to have to be some level of understanding and who owns the data and who protects what. But beyond that, how you share with others, I think is fairly wide open.
All right, we have time for one last question. Make it quick.
Hopefully a quick one. Are there lessons that we can learn from science fiction? I'm looking at the future. Philip K. Dick, William Gibson, Neil Stephenson. I mean, we have people who've written about this stuff. Some of it's not pretty, but can we learn from it?
2001
George
Space
Orwell.
Odyssey.
I'm thinking about about Bones on Star Trek, and he had that MRI, what eventually became the MRI. You know, there's good things that come from technologies.
Well, I don't think we're going to become Skynet or the board or something, but if so many of you know me, I'm going to flip back to a quick historical reference. The Victorian Internet was called the Highway of Thought, and that was the telegraph machine. And that raised a lot of concerns on privacy. We saw those, and we went through, and now we really do have the true internet, and now every device is part of the internet of everything. So the science fiction in this case is positive, is my perspective. Not sure it answers the question, but...
To give a counterexample, if we think back at the Holocaust, it was IBM machines that were used to be able to keep track of people.
Yes.
And so there's evidence that throughout history that we've used technology for very bad reasons, and we need to really work against that.
We've reached the end of our time here for this panel, but I think we jumped into a couple of really good issues. I think the anticipation is connectivity is going to have a lot of positive effect. The Internet of Things is really how we're going to connect all these disparate silos together and make them work, but provide them in a safe and secure manner. A lot of good research is going to happen at places like tech, in industry, and I think really want to thank these people for sharing their good thoughts. So give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.